You believe your thoughts are your own. You believe the choices you make each day are products of free will, careful reasoning, and personal preference. You believe that you are the author of your own mind. But what if nearly everything you think, feel, and decide has been quietly shaped by forces you never noticed? What if your mind is far more malleable than you ever imagined? And what if people who understand this have been pulling your strings all along? In 1977, a group of researchers approached random strangers on the street with a simple request. They asked if they could cut in line at a copy machine. When they simply asked, "Excuse me, may I use the machine?" about 60% of people agreed. But when they added a reason, even a completely meaningless one, compliance shot up to 93%. The phrase they used was, "Excuse me, may I use the machine because I have to make copies?" The reason was absurd. Everyone at a copy machine is there to make copies. It provided zero new information, but it worked. The human mind is hardwired to respond to the pattern of a request followed by a reason, and it often doesn't bother to evaluate whether that reason actually makes sense. This was not a study about copy machines. It was a study about how shockingly easy it is to bypass rational thought and trigger automatic compliance. And this is just one of thousands of mental shortcuts, cognitive biases, and psychological vulnerabilities that make your mind far less secure than you believe it to be. Every day, people exploit these vulnerabilities. Advertisers use them to make you buy things you don't need. Politicians use them to make you support policies against your own interests. Manipulators use them to control your behavior and extract what they want from you. And you almost never notice because the manipulation is happening below the level of conscious awareness. Your mind is not a fortress. It is a door left unlocked, and anyone who knows where to push can walk right in. The first thing you need to understand is that your brain was not designed for the world you live in. It evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to solve problems that no longer exist, to navigate social groups of no more than 150 people, to make rapid decisions based on limited information. In environments where hesitation could mean death, those evolutionary adaptations were remarkably effective for survival on the African savanna, but they leave you profoundly vulnerable in the modern world. You are walking around with ancient hardware, trying to run contemporary software, and the glitches are everywhere. Psychologists have identified hundreds of cognitive biases, systematic errors in thinking that occur predictably and unconsciously. These are not occasional mistakes. They are fundamental features of how your mind processes information, and once someone understands these features, manipulating you becomes almost trivial. Consider the anchoring effect, one of the most robust findings in behavioral economics. When you're asked to make a numerical estimate, your answer is heavily influenced by whatever number you encountered first, even if that number is completely irrelevant. In one classic study, researchers asked participants to spin a wheel that randomly landed on either 10 or 65, and then estimate what percentage of African nations were members of the United Nations. The participants who saw the number 10 guessed an average of 25%. Those who saw 65 guessed an average of 45%. The wheel was clearly random. The number meant nothing, but it anchored its subsequent judgment anyway. This effect is so powerful that even experts are vulnerable to it. Judges give harsher sentences when they are exposed to higher numbers before sentencing. Negotiators are influenced by the first offer on the table, even when they know it's a deliberate manipulation. Real estate agents price homes based on the listing price they saw first, regardless of the property's actual value. Your mind latches onto the first piece of information it encounters and uses that as a reference point for everything that follows. And this happens whether you want it to or not. Now imagine you're shopping for a car. The salesperson shows you the most expensive model first, fully loaded with features, priced at $70,000. Then they walk you over to the model they actually want to sell you, priced at $45,000. That $45,000 suddenly feels reasonable, even cheap, because your brain is comparing it to the $70,000 anchor. You would never have considered spending $45,000 if that had been the first price you saw, but now it seems like a bargain. You have been manipulated and you don't even realize it. You drive off the lot feeling like you made a smart decision, like you negotiated well, like you were in control. But you were not. Your mind was hijacked by a simple psychological mechanism, and the salesperson knew exactly what they were doing. This is just one technique among many. Advertisers have spent billions of dollars researching how to bypass your rational defenses and implant desires directly into your subconscious. They use classical conditioning, the same process that made Pavlov's dogs salivate at the sound of a bell. They pair their products with images and sounds that trigger positive emotions. Luxury cars are shown in front of beautiful homes with attractive people, not because the car has anything to do with those things, but because your brain will associate the car with the feelings those images evoke. Beer commercials feature groups of friends, laughing and having fun, exploiting your deep evolutionary need for social belonging. Perfume ads are deliberately abstract and surreal because they are not trying to communicate anything logical. They are trying to create an emotional imprint, a sense of mystery, and desire that you will later associate with the brand. And it works. Studies using brain imaging have shown that exposure to branded products activates the same reward centers in your brain as addictive drugs. You are being conditioned, and the conditioning is so subtle that you experience the resulting desires as authentic preferences rather than manufactured impulses. The frequency with which you encounter information also shapes what you believe to be true, a phenomenon psychologists call the illusory truth effect. When you hear the same statement repeated multiple times, your brain begins to perceive it as more credible, regardless of whether it is actually accurate. This happens even when you are explicitly told the statement is false. In experiments, participants rated false statements as more believable after seeing them multiple times, even though they had been informed the statements were lies. Your mind mistakes familiarity for truth. The more often you encounter a claim, the more real it feels. And this cognitive shortcut makes you extraordinarily vulnerable to propaganda. Authoritarian regimes have understood this for decades. They repeat the same messages relentlessly through every available channel, until those messages become accepted as reality. But you don't need a totalitarian government to exploit this effect. Political campaigns do it with slogans. Conspiracy theories spread through repetition on social media. Even personal manipulators use this technique, telling you the same false narrative over and over, until you start to doubt your own memories and perceptions. Your mind is also highly susceptible to social proof, the tendency to determine what is correct by looking at what other people are doing. This instinct served your ancestors well. If everyone in the tribe was running in one direction, it was probably a good idea to run that way too, rather than stopping to analyze whether there was actually a threat. But in the modern world, this instinct is weaponized against you constantly. Websites display how many people have purchased a product. Reviews are prominently featured even when they are fake. Laugh tracks on television shows tell you when to find something funny. And research shows that people actually do laugh more when they hear others laughing, even when the laughter is recorded. Advertisers create the illusion of scarcity and popularity because they know that you are more likely to want something if you believe other people want it too. You are not making an independent assessment of value. You are outsourcing that assessment to the crowd, and the crowd can be manufactured. The psychologist Robert Cialdini spent years studying compliance and identified several principles that reliably increase the likelihood that someone will say yes to a request. One is reciprocity, the powerful human impulse to repay favors. If someone gives you something, even something small that you didn't ask for, you feel obligated to give something back. This is why restaurants bring mints with the check. Studies show that tips increase when servers provide mints, and they increase even more if the server gives you a mint, walks away, then returns and gives you another one while making eye contact, as if giving you something extra special. You know rationally that this is a trivial gesture, that the mint costs almost nothing. But your brain doesn't care. The reciprocity instinct is automatic, and it overrides your rational calculation. Manipulators exploit this constantly. They use small, unsolicited favors specifically to create a sense of indebtedness that they can later collect on. The favor might be worth $5, but the obligation you feel might lead you to agree to something worth far more. Another principle is commitment and consistency. Once you take a position or make a choice, especially a public one, you feel psychological pressure to behave consistently with that choice even if circumstances change. Salespeople exploit this by getting you to make small commitments that lead to larger ones. They might ask you a series of questions designed to get you saying yes. Do you think you deserve quality? Yes. Do you want the best for your family? Yes. Would you like to save money? Yes. By the time they ask you to buy, you have already established a pattern of agreement, and saying no would feel inconsistent. Political campaigns use this by getting people to display yard signs or bumper stickers. Once you have publicly identified with a candidate, you become more likely to vote for them, to defend them, to overlook their flaws, because admitting you were wrong would create cognitive dissonance. Your mind will twist itself into knots to maintain internal consistency, and manipulators use this against you by locking you into positions that serve their interests rather than yours. Perhaps most disturbing is how easily your memories can be altered. You experience memory as a kind of video playback, a faithful recording of past events. But that is not how memory works. Every time you recall something, you're not accessing a static file. You are reconstructing the memory from fragments, and that reconstruction is influenced by your current beliefs, emotions, and suggestions from others. The psychologist Elizabeth Loftus has demonstrated this with disturbing clarity. In one famous study, she showed participants footage of a car accident and then asked them questions about it. When she asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other, participants estimated higher speeds than when she asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. The single word, smashed versus hit, altered their memory of what they had seen. In more extreme experiments, Loftus has implanted entirely false memories into people's minds, convincing them that they experienced events that never happened. Roughly 30% of participants came to believe they had been lost in a shopping mall as a child, a completely fabricated event, simply through repeated suggestion and encouragement to recall details. If your memories can be manipulated this easily in a controlled experiment, imagine how vulnerable they are in real life when someone with a vested interest is actively trying to reshape your perception of the past. This is how gaslighting works. An abusive partner repeatedly tells you that events you clearly remember did not happen the way you think they did. They tell you that you're being too sensitive, that you are misremembering, that you are imagining things. Over time, your confidence in your own perceptions erodes. You begin to doubt yourself. You defer to their version of reality because they seem so certain and you have become so uncertain. This is not a failure of intelligence or strength. It is exploitation of how memory actually functions. Your mind is not a reliable witness to your own life and people who understand. This can rewrite your history. You are also far more influenced by emotion than by logic, even though you believe the opposite. When you make decisions, you think you are weighing evidence, considering pros and cons, arriving at rational conclusions. But neuroscience has shown that emotion precedes and shapes reasoning, not the other way around. You feel first, then you construct rational-sounding justifications for what you already feel. This is why political campaigns focus on fear and anger rather than policy details. This is why advertisements aim for emotional resonance rather than factual information. This is why manipulators tell stories that make you feel something rather than presenting you with data. Once they have triggered the right emotional state, your reasoning will follow predictably, generating justifications that feel like independent thought, but are actually post hoc rationalizations for an emotional conclusion that was already reached. The illusion of control makes all of this worse. You believe you are aware of the factors influencing your decisions, that you would notice if someone were manipulating you, that you are too smart to fall for obvious tricks. But study after study has shown that intelligence does not protect you from these biases. In fact, highly intelligent people are often more vulnerable because they are better at constructing sophisticated rationalizations for their biased conclusions. You use your intelligence to defend beliefs you arrived at through non-rational means, and you do this so skillfully that you convince yourself the beliefs were rational all along. This is called motivated reasoning, and it operates completely outside your awareness. You are not objectively evaluating information. You are selectively gathering and interpreting information to support conclusions you already want to believe. And you're doing this while experiencing the subjective sensation of being open-minded and rational. Tech companies have turned manipulation into a science. The platforms you use every day were designed by teams of engineers and psychologists whose explicit goal is to maximize your engagement, which means maximizing the time you spend and the content you consume. They use variable reward schedules, the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. You pull down to refresh your feed, and sometimes there is something interesting, sometimes there is nothing. And that unpredictability keeps you checking obsessively because your brain is wired to find variable rewards more compelling than predictable ones. They use infinite scroll, so there is no natural stopping point, exploiting your tendency to continue a behavior once started rather than making the active decision to stop. They use notification badges that trigger anxiety and compulsion. They track every click, every pause, every interaction, and they feed that data into algorithms that learn exactly what keeps you hooked. And it works. The average person now spends over 7 hours a day looking at screens, much of it on platforms specifically engineered to be psychologically irresistible. This is not an accident. It is not a side effect. It is the explicit business model. Your attention is the product being sold to advertisers, and the platforms have become extraordinarily sophisticated at capturing and holding that attention by exploiting the deepest vulnerabilities in human psychology. They know what makes you angry because anger drives engagement. They know what makes you anxious because anxiety makes you check your phone. They know what makes you feel inadequate because inadequacy makes you seek validation through likes and comments. And they use this knowledge deliberately to keep you in a state of perpetual distraction and craving. You think you're choosing to use these platforms, but your choices have been shaped by systems designed to override your self-control. Political manipulation has also evolved. Modern propaganda does not rely on convincing you of specific facts. It relies on overwhelming you with so much contradictory information that you give up trying to discern what is true. This technique, sometimes called the fire hose of falsehood, was perfected by authoritarian regimes, but has now spread everywhere. The goal is not to make you believe lies. The goal is to make you doubt that truth is even knowable to create. A state of epistemic exhaustion where you stop trusting any source and retreat into cynicism or apathy. Once you reach that state, you become easy to control because you have abandoned the effort to verify claims or hold leaders accountable. You accept whatever narrative feels most emotionally satisfying because you have given up on distinguishing truth from fiction. Even your sense of identity is more fluid and manipulable than you realize. The psychologist Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, despite its methodological flaws, demonstrated how quickly people adopt the behaviors associated with assigned roles. College students randomly designated as guards became authoritarian and cruel within days. Those designated as prisoners became passive and submissive. The roles were arbitrary, the prison was fake, but the psychological transformation was real. You're not a fixed self. You are a collection of context-dependent selves. And which self emerges depends on the situation you are placed in and the role you are assigned. Manipulators exploit this by framing situations in ways that activate the version of you that serves their purposes. A recruiter for an extremist group does not try to change who you are. They create an environment where the part of you that craves belonging, purpose, and identity becomes dominant, and then they offer to fulfill those needs in exchange for your loyalty. You are being manipulated right now in ways you do not perceive. The layout of the grocery store is designed to make you walk past tempting items. The music playing in a restaurant is timed to influence how quickly you eat. The phrasing of the question on the survey is structured to elicit a particular answer. The order in which information is presented in the news shapes which facts you remember and which you forget. The default settings on your devices are chosen to benefit the company, not you, and most people never change defaults. Every environment you move through has been architected by someone, and those architects are not neutral. They have goals, and many of those goals involve influencing your behavior in ways that benefit them at your expense. The most unsettling part is that even knowing about these mechanisms does not fully protect you. Awareness helps, but these biases and vulnerabilities are so deeply embedded in how your brain functions that they persist even after you learn about them. You can know about the anchoring effect and still be influenced by irrelevant numbers. You can know about social proof and still feel compelled to follow the crowd. You can know about the illusory truth effect and still find repeated lies more believable. The manipulation is not happening at the level of conscious thought. It is happening in the automatic, unconscious processes that generate your intuitions and impulses. And those processes are not fully under your voluntary control. This does not mean you are helpless. It means you need to build systems and habits that compensate for your vulnerabilities. It means slowing down before making decisions, especially important ones, and deliberately checking whether you're being influenced by anchors, social proof, scarcity, authority, or any of the other known mechanisms of manipulation. It means diversifying your information sources and actively seeking out perspectives that challenge your existing beliefs. It means questioning your emotional reactions and asking whether someone might be deliberately triggering those emotions to bypass your rational analysis. It means recognizing that your intuition, while sometimes useful, is also frequently wrong, and that feelings of certainty are not the same as actual knowledge. Your mind is not your own. It never has been. From the moment you wake until the moment you sleep, you are bombarded with stimuli designed to shape your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in ways that serve someone else's agenda. The products you buy, the beliefs you hold, the political positions you defend, the way you spend your time, even the memories you trust, all of these have been influenced by forces operating below your conscious awareness. You walk through life believing you are the author of your choices, but you are more often the character in someone else's script. The manipulation is so pervasive and so sophisticated that resisting it requires constant vigilance. And even then, you'll never be fully free. The question is not whether you are being manipulated. You are. The question is whether you will continue sleepwalking through it or whether you will start paying attention to the hands pulling your strings. If this video disturbed you, good. That discomfort is the first step toward reclaiming some measure of control over your own mind. Subscribe to this channel for more investigations into the psychology that shapes human behavior. Leave a comment describing a moment when you realized you have been manipulated. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how vulnerable they really are. And most importantly, start paying attention to the forces acting on your mind every single day. Notice when you are being anchored. Notice when social proof is being manufactured. Notice when your emotions are being deliberately triggered. You cannot eliminate your vulnerabilities, but you can learn to recognize when they are being exploited. The puppeteers rely on you not noticing the strings. Start looking up.